Hello everybody, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Chris Harold. I'm the YaraVita product manager for the UK and Ireland, and I'm talking to you today from our base here at Pocklington in East Yorkshire. Today's webinar, we'll be looking at maximising your crop's potential with foliar nutrition. There are CPD points available for today's webinar, and the codes for those are at the bottom of the screen for you if you wanted to make a note of those. I will put those back up at the end of the presentation so that you've got those, and for those attending the webinar who are perhaps joining a little bit later. So there will be, as we've done in previous webinars, opportunities to pose questions, and we'll leave the Q&A session to the end of the webinar. We have had a few questions come in already, which we'll answer those at the end of the session. But if you've got any other questions, please put those into the chat and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. So today we're going to start with a poll. Just a few questions I wanted to pose before we get into the presentations. I will then look at a little bit about addressing obviously the challenges that we've had to date with autumn sown crops and the excess amount of rainfall that most regions of the UK have had to endure. Then we'll talk about getting the basics right, and then move on to look at foliar nutrition in oilseed rape, winter cereals, and just touch on foliar nutrition of pulse crops as well before we finish with the question and answer. So I've got 3 poll questions to put to you. If I could ask for you to have a look at those, and then we'll move on into the presentation after that. So the first question today is how much of your planned winter cropping has established successfully? So I'll just give you 30-40 seconds to have a look at that, and then we'll move on to the next one. I will show the results to the poll at the end as well, just for those of you who might have missed it at the start. Okay, just a few more seconds. Right, so we'll move on to the next one. So the next one is, of the remaining cropping area, what are you planning to establish this spring? A combinable crop, a root crop, a stewardship option, or a combination of all of those? Great, thank you very much for that. And finally, last question, have you used tissue analysis as a tool to manage your foliar crop nutrition applications? Great, thank you. I think just a few more votes coming in. Right, there. Brilliant, thank you for that. Well, we'll share those results at the end as well, but that's very useful. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's move on to talking about crop nutrition this spring. So clearly, we have had excess amounts of rainfall, not just over the winter, but through the autumn as well. And the image on the left of the screen is showing you the rainfall in December and January. And you can see in a lot of parts of the country it was above average. And certainly at home here in East Yorkshire during February, I've recorded another 100 millimetres of rain in February to top that up further. So let's hope conditions will start to improve soon, so that we can get back out onto the land and catch up with some of those outstanding jobs we never got done in the autumn, and hopefully get to see the winter crops improving and an opportunity to get spring crops sown as well. But of interest, I thought I'd just put this in here as well. Over that same period, December, January, air temperatures have been above average. So for all it's been a very wet period of weather, it's also been relatively mild. And I think looking at soil temperatures locally and seeing how crops are starting to grow, clearly the temperature has had an influence over the crop's ability to grow, and perhaps help a bit of mineralization of nitrogen within the soil to help these crops just keep ticking over where they can. So I just thought that was interesting to note. So before we get right into talking about particular nutrients, I thought it was worth, because it is relevant, how waterlogging affects crops. Well, clearly it alters the physical soil properties. The excess water reduces that soil porosity, and you get that anaerobic situation, which limits root growth. That also impacts on denitrification, reducing nitrate to nitrite, which can be toxic to the crops. You get nutrient leaching, especially on lighter soils, and particularly of things like nitrogen, sulfur, and also trace elements like boron. Of other concern would be the amount of impact this is having on soil microbes, and you know, the microbes have that effect on organic matter decomposition, mineralization, but also end fixation. So if we've got winter beans in the ground, for example, their ability to fix nitrogen where they're sitting in anaerobic conditions will be having an impact. Root growth will have been compromised during that period of waterlogging as well. And we know that's clearly going to have an issue around nutrient uptake this spring. And if we do go into a drier period of weather, which you'd have to wonder, nature could rebalance itself, then a compromised root structure now is going to struggle to take up the crop's requirement for nutrients and also water later on in the season. So there's a range of issues out there that the weather has contributed to do at this point in time. We know crop growth is limited by the most deficient nutrient. I'm sure you've probably all seen Liebig's barrel picture before. Plant nutrients have specific and essential functions in crop metabolism. They can't replace each other, and lack of any one nutrient limits crop growth. And that's why we're talking today, excuse me, around a balanced approach to nutrition for your crops. But interesting, you can see there at the top of the barrel, in a year like this, you know, you could have all the nutrients correct, but if the soil conditions are not right, then we're still going to have issues around maximising our crop's yield. And I want to sort of focus more about talking about nutrient sufficiency now, rather than reacting to nutrient deficiency. We've all seen pictures like this before, manganese deficiency in a crop. It's very obvious, it's very visual. It highlights probably a particular soil type in a field, and we react to that situation by applying manganese, for example. But we know that there is that hidden hunger element within nutrition concentration within a plant, and it's that area that I think we need to remember to focus on, so that we're always in that adequate nutrition area. Clearly, we can look at tissue analysis, sap analysis, soil analysis, and even now I know quite a lot of growers and agronomists are using grain analysis at the end of the season to look back on how successful their crop nutrition program was. And I think really I would encourage everybody to sort of look at that approach in combination. I don't think one measure of analysis is going to give you the full picture. I think you need that combination throughout the season to really help you maximize what you can do with your crop nutrition. And that's all before you look to an answer from a product, whatever that might be. And it's sort of looking at getting the basics right first. What I'll be talking about over the next few slides with foliar nutrition is not going to answer, broadly speaking, what a crop requires in the way of macronutrients. Yes, we can top up nitrogen, phosphate, potash, even sulfur with a foliar application, but we're only talking about applying grams or single kilograms of nutrients. We know that obviously the macronutrients are required in tens of kilograms throughout the season. So we're not talking about silver bullets with foliar applications. It's more of a part of that complete crop nutrition approach. And getting the basics right, pH, again, you'll have probably all seen the chart there on the left, showing the availability of individual nutrients depending on the pH of the soil. And I know I've done a lot of pH analysis on farms over the years, and it really is a useful way of understanding what could be going on within a crop. Yes, you could do it within a crop during the growing season, but it's something probably not to do at this point of the year. Probably to do after harvest, and then correct that pH if it needs it ahead of next year's crop. So moving on to look at oilseed rape now as the first crop I want to focus on today. There are a range of nutrients that are essential in oilseed rape and helping it maximize its yield potential. Boron and molybdenum are often talked about in brassica crops as well as oilseed rape, but also we've seen that manganese and magnesium are particularly important as well in oilseed rape crops. And they all play their part in the overall crop's health. You know, magnesium is a key component of chlorophyll. Manganese plays a key role in photosynthesis, and molybdenum plays an important part in keeping leaf blade area, and boron's a key part of flowering and cell structure throughout the growing period of oilseed rape. And those are what we see if we've got a deficiency in a crop of oilseed rape on the left with boron. As crops enter this rapid stem extension stage, which they are starting to do now, if the crop isn't sufficiently supplied with boron during that rapid stem extension stage, we get that splitting in the stems because boron isn't particularly mobile in the plant. So if we can load that in there earlier on and help it through that rapid stage, we'll hopefully minimize that issue around splitting in the stems. Manganese as well and magnesium there. As I say, we quite often see magnesium deficiency in oilseed rape tissue samples sent into the lab here at Pocklington, and molybdenum as well. You know, that whiptail effect of deficiency can often be seen as well. Don't need a lot of molybdenum. A few grams is often all that's required to rectify deficiency of molybdenum. So there are the results from the land crop lab over the last 4 or 5 years in oilseed rape. And as I mentioned, you can see in the red, you know, molybdenum from the right, boron, magnesium, and also in this case, potassium showing up as being slightly low to very low in all of those samples. So we know there are issues out there when we've been tissue testing. And when we look back over our involvement with the YEN, the Yield Enhancement Network, that's done with ADAS, and the tissue results here, when we've compared the top 5 versus the bottom 5 yielding oilseed rape crops over those few years, the higher yielding crops for all of those individual nutrients had a higher concentration of those nutrients within those tissues samples that were sent in. And we see that in other crops as well, but it just shows that those higher yielding crops had the correct nutrition through that growing period. I should say the numbers on the bottom axis are the days of the year. So 60 is the 60th day of the year, which is about where we are sat here today, end of February, and then 90 days is the end of March, and so on and throughout. So it's the growing season, if you like. And Brachytrol Pro, the first product I'd like to talk to you about today, has been developed specifically for oilseed rape. It contains all the key nutrients we've just talked about, plus some more. And we've seen that spring application of 3 litres to the hectare consistently given us over 1/4 of a tonne to the hectare yield increase from that spring application. It's a highly concentrated formulation. As I say, it's been specifically formulated for brassica crops such as oilseed rape. It's a simple 1 can product, easy to handle and use, and widely tank mixable. So if you are going to be going through your oilseed rape crops in the next couple of weeks, perhaps with a fungicide, or even in the better crops considering a growth regulator, then it's tank mixable with those type of additional products as well. So we're in this period now, I would say. There's a lot of crops look like that picture on the left-hand side at the top, and some further down country even starting to look like that one on the right-hand side as well. But don't leave it too late. The real benefit from an application of Brachytrol Pro will be in the next few weeks during that rapid stem extension stage. So 3 litres to the hectare of Brachytrol, given current commodity prices, I've put oilseed rape in there around about £370 a tonne, then giving a good return on your investment. just sort of 50 kilograms to the hectare extra yield to cover the cost. And as I say, you're getting over a quarter of a tonne in yield from that application. Looking a little bit further down into the season, clearly this year some oilseed rape crops have still had a challenging year, and tailoring your nitrogen applications to those crops is going to be challenging. But there's always that option later on if you feel that the crop has gained more potential as the spring's gone on, to top up those nitrogen applications either with a product like Safe N or even a multi-nutrient product like CropLift Pro. And there's always the urea products like Schaefer Newfall as well. If you feel there's a benefit, it's likely to give you a return from that application. So moving on to winter cereals now. So I'm thinking winter wheat primarily, but also winter barley. We know yield is driven by the number of ears per square metre, and then the number of grains per ear and the weight of those individual grains. And the AHDB benchmark for an 11-tonne crop of winter wheat is 460 ears per square metre, 48 grains per ear, and 50 milligrams per grain. So those are the benchmarks. And we're in the foundation stage now. It's critical now that we assess these crops, understand the yield potential that they've got, taking into account obviously everything that they've had to endure since they were sown, and that's about maximising as much biomass as we can during this foundation stage over the next month basically. So that's getting enough nitrogen on and sulphur to encourage those crops to tiller, and really try and improve the root structure as well if we can over the next few weeks. And I'll talk a little bit more about nitrogen and sulphur in a minute. And again, just sort of referencing the yield enhancement network, the YEN data suggests that the higher biomass crops lead to higher yielding crops. I will touch on phosphate as well, and a little bit on manganese as well over the next few slides. I know the webinar is principally around foliar nutrition, but I think it's an appropriate time, given the current situation, to just touch on nitrogen. And timing is crucial. I think if we'd been having this conversation or this webinar a month ago, we'd have probably been looking at more about splitting those applications early, taking a little and often approach. But as the weather has hindered field activity again during February, I think now we need to start thinking about higher early doses if they haven't already been applied. And the image on the left of the screen was some work Yara did 10 years ago now, but you can see there from going with a higher initial application of nitrogen, moving from 40 to 70 kilograms and from 70 up to 100 kilograms in that first split. It's had a big impact on the number of tillers. That's really what we're needing to achieve now. And the work on the right-hand side that was done 10 years prior to that, it's telling us the same story basically. I know there's two different seed rates in that work, but basically the higher nitrogen applications early led to a higher number of ears per metre squared. So I think we're in that situation now where nitrogen rates need to be adapted for the time of year. And it's important just to mention sulphur as well. There's a lot of comparisons being made to the current season to what happened in 2019 and 2020. We had a similar wet autumn of 2019, and into early 2020. And this is just a piece of work that Yara did in that year, looking at a little and often approach to sulfur applications. And in that year, using Axan, which is a 27N9S product, that gave us a useful yield increase over just using Extran, which is straight nitrogen, throughout the season. So I think, again, we've talked about the leaching of sulfur through soils, including that sulfur early on. And if you've got the ability to keep applying sulfur little and often throughout the season, it should pay dividends, particularly in a season like this. I said I'd just touch on manganese. I think most farmers and agronomists are well attuned to what's required with manganese. And all I'm saying here is don't delay it. If you can travel and there's a manganese issue identified in a field, then we can't get that biomass back. If the manganese deficiency is that severe, make sure you've got plenty of manganese onto the crop, because we just can't get that biomass back. The image on the left of the screen is taken off our @farm platform, and that's just highlighting a field that I'm familiar with that historically always has problems with manganese deficiency. It's got light soil pockets within it, and the yellow and lighter areas in that image are just highlighting that, basically. I wanted to talk about phosphorus now. It's not just about nitrogen and sulfur. Phosphate is very important for root growth, we know that. And as soil temperatures, as I said, they are starting to increase, but it's not until they get sort of above 8 degrees centigrade that sufficient quantities of P is available in enough quantities anyway. So during that sort of initial phase, we know we need to do what we can to help crops with their roots if they've been compromised by waterlogging. Available fresh applications of phosphate this spring could help alleviate that. And if you haven't got those products, then a foliar application of phosphate could be an alternative approach. And you may well have seen these slides before, but this was some work we did here at the greenhouse at Pocklington, just looking at foliar applications of phosphate. And this was on barley. You can see that we had a 10% increase in root and shoot weight from that foliar application. And if the root structure has been compromised and we're struggling to get onto the crop, or we haven't got a phosphate fertilizer source, it may be appropriate to apply a foliar application and bypass that issue around the roots and get some fresh phosphate into the leaf. Our sort of recommendation for that at the moment would be our product Crop Boost, which has a readily available form of phosphate within it. Also contains some potassium, magnesium and a bit of zinc as well. It's quickly taken up by the plant and it provides a lasting feeding effect as well. Where we've looked at Crop Boost applications and then followed up with an application of Gramitrel, which I'll talk about shortly, we've seen a very useful yield increase of over 0.5 ton to the hectare from that sequenced application. And when you put the two together, 3 litres of Crop Boost applied during that tillering period and followed up later on, so the growth stage 30, 31 with the Gramitrel, we've seen a good return on investment. With wheat valued at £180 a tonne in this calculation, you only needed 0.2 of a tonne, or just under 0.2 of a tonne, to cover the cost of that application. Just to say that don't be tempted to mix the two products together. The foliar phosphate product, Crop Boost, has a very different pH to Gramitrel, which means they're not compatible in the same tank. So if you're going to do it, just make sure that you get the Crop Boost on early with a plan to come back with the Gramitrel later on. So I've talked about the foundation stage and how important getting that biomass built up early is going to be, particularly this year. Now I want to talk a bit about the construction stage. And this is all about optimum grain set and making sure that the crop has got all the essential nutrients it needs to help it stave off diseases, but also maximise that grain set later on. So we're thinking of copper, manganese and zinc, but also I want to touch on boron today as well, because I think that's an element that's showing up as being deficient in a lot of tissue analysis done in the spring, and it's probably an element that hasn't had a lot of attention given to it in cereal crops anyway, up until now. And when you look at the importance of micronutrients and how important they're going to be this year for manipulating grain numbers and ear numbers, this is just looking at applications of manganese and zinc. On the left, how applications of manganese and zinc gave us an increase in the number of ears, but also you can see on the right hand side of the screen how manganese and also zinc increase the number of grains per ear. And we know where these elements are important within the cereal crops. You know, copper and zinc, you know, they help with lignification, pollen release, increasing fertilization, and reducing that incidence of blind grains that we can sometimes see. Also, I think it helps overcome issues around lodging if we've got those elements in sufficient supply early on in the spring. And also, I've already touched on manganese, but magnesium as well could play a part here in helping the crop have sufficient chlorophyll as well. So I've just highlighted here, this is the tissue analysis that we've had here at the lab at Pocklington over the last few years and in winter wheat, and you can see there's still deficiency showing up with zinc, manganese, copper and also magnesium. But I also wanted to just highlight boron. As I mentioned a moment ago, it is showing up on a regular basis as having being deficient in cereal crops as well, and potassium often shows up as being deficient in the leaf analysis that we see as well. If I just refer to the yen work again, similar to what I was showing you in the oilseed rape section, again those higher yielding crops shown here in the green, having a higher concentration of those key elements throughout the growing season, or at key points of the growing season. And that's true of manganese and zinc, and we also see it with the boron as well. And interestingly, that tends to be almost more important the further into the season that you get. So we're thinking probably applications at that classic T1 and even T2 timings. And boron, why we're talking about boron? Well, it's important for pollen viability and therefore fertilization, so that you get an adequate seed set. And we know about the issues around boron's availability on alkaline soils. Here on the Wolds, we know that boron availability is often compromised because of that high pH. It's leachable. I've mentioned that already. So long periods of wet weather, and also issues on those sandy soils in those situations. This is some work that was done a few years ago now, but it was just looking at the addition of boron into a more standard foliar nutrient application in the spring. And you can see here where we added Bortrac to Gramitrel, or even to using straight elements as well. There was a yield benefit from including the Bortrac. So just looking at the Gramitrel, it's a bit like we talked about Brashitrel for Ortidrape. Gramitrel is an easy to use one can product for cereals. It supplies all those key nutrients that we've just talked about: copper, manganese and zinc, but it also contains some magnesium and a bit of nitrogen as well. Widely tank mixable, extremely safe to the crop, and it gives that lasting feeding effect as well. In trials work, we've seen from that 2 litres of Gramitrel applied between growth stage 30 to 32, over 0.5 tonne per hectare yield increase from that spring application. And that's been replicated over a number of years. So our sort of core recommendation for winter cereals would be 2 litres of Gramitrel. To counteract that issue around the boron that I've already highlighted, we would recommend including 0.5 litre of Bortrac with the Gramitrel. And again, looking at the sort of financial side of that, if we just take that 0.55 of a tonne per hectare yield increase from the Gramitrel, I'm not allowing any extra for the inclusion of the boron here, but that's giving a margin over input cost of £82 per hectare. So that's a very good return on investment with the wheat valued at £180 to the tonne. Hopefully there would be an additional benefit from including the boron. So we've looked at the foundation stage, we've looked at the construction stage, we're now looking at the production stage, so the latter end of the season, that's sort of T2 through to T3 timing. There's still a long way to go to harvest at this point, and we know we've got to keep that crop photosynthesizing, keep it green for as long as we can. And you've seen these before, I'm sure, from the AHDB, the contribution that the top part of the canopy in a winter wheat crop is making. Most of that yield is coming from the flag leaf, we know that, but we mustn't ignore the impact that those leaves 2 and 3 are making, and also the ear will contribute as well. And we know the canopy size is important. We need to have that green area index of over 6 when we get to that sort of growth stage 61, the latter stages of the season. So it's all about building up that biomass early on so that we've got that green area index, and then keeping that canopy greener and photosynthesizing for as long as we can. And that's where magnesium plays its part at that latter end, improving photosynthesis. It's a key component of chlorophyll. And we know we get better protein synthesis when magnesium's in sufficient supply. Potassium, it's important for lodging and minimizing brackling as well, but we know it plays a key role in water regulation in crops. If the season does flip around and we go into a very dry period after all the wet weather we've had, then having sufficient potassium in the crop at that latter stage of the season is going to be critical. And if the root structure has been compromised, then a foliar application may be an alternative way of making sure you've got sufficient supply in the crop. And as we know, once you get towards the end of April and during that construction and production period, the crop requirement for potash is quite immense. It's 10 kilograms per hectare per day through that period. And as I said, if the root structure's been compromised early and we haven't managed to rectify that, then a foliar application at the latter stages may be the right approach. And this was some work we did a few years ago in North Lincolnshire on 3 different winter wheat varieties, where we applied foliar potash at the T3 stage. And you can see in each of those cases there was a benefit from applying that at that stage of the crop's growth. So if you were to put what I've just talked about into a programmed approach throughout the season, if you start with the crop boost early on, if there's a possibility of getting onto those crops where you know they've perhaps been compromised or the root structure's been compromised, 3 litres of crop boost during that tillering stage prior to the T0 timing, so any time in the next couple of weeks really. If you're going through with other inputs onto those crops, consider including some crop boost. And then Gramitrel we see as fitting at sort of growth stage 30 through to 32 to supply all those key nutrients that the crop needs at that time. And consider including some boron, some bore track at that time as well. Then I talked about the production phase, and that's where we need to include some magnesium, keep that foliage greener for longer, and if necessary, consider using a product like Magphos K towards the end of the season to supply that potash that we saw is so important for that stage of the crop. If we just look at winter barley now, then Gramitrel earlier on at that T1 timing, again, it serves the same purpose in winter barley as it would do in winter wheat, supplying those key nutrients. And then latterly, Magphos K, for the same reasons I just mentioned in winter wheat, to supply the crop with an extra kick of those key nutrients at that latter growth stages. And just to touch on spring barley, it's an area I'll probably cover in a separate webinar in more detail. But clearly, manganese can quite often be important in spring barley, so make sure that you've got that covered early on. And then Gramitrel again would fit later on at that T1 timing. And with spring barley, it's such a short growing season, or it can be, that we need to make sure that we keep that crop topped up with all the key nutrients that they will need. I just wanted to touch on pulse crops. Again, it's something else probably for a webinar of their own, but I think sometimes they get a little bit forgotten about when it comes to foliar nutrition. And I think that the reason I'm mentioning it today is where winter beans are in the ground, they clearly will have suffered with all the heavy rain that we've had as well. And the legumes, they rely on those root nodules to supply the crop or the plant with nitrogen. And if the microbes and the metabolism of the rhizobia have been compromised because of the anaerobic conditions in the soil, then that will be compromising those plants' ability to grow. And sometimes it can help to overcome those issues by applying a foliar application of a nutrient to help overcome that. We know, once the nodules can be seen, that symbiotic relationship will be functioning, and the crop will be supplying the bacteria with carbohydrate and receiving back ammonia from the rhizobia. And if those nodules are pink, then they're functioning well. If they're not looking pink, then there could be some issues and the crop's probably not going to be receiving the nitrogen that it needs. And if we just look a little bit deeper into the activity of the rhizobia and where the key nutrients play their part, the nitrogenase enzyme is complex, and a number of different nutrients play their part in that, including magnesium, sulfur, molybdenum, and even manganese. And as the crop, whether it's a pea crop or a bean crop, develops and it eventually starts to produce flowers and therefore eventually starts setting seeds and pods, then the plant at that stage, it can't support both the demands for of the nodule for carbohydrate and also filling those seeds. And it's at that stage where probably an application of a complete foliar product will help top up the crop's requirement for those key nutrients. So our recommendation in pulse crops would be to use some YaraVita Foliar Pro. It's a fully soluble powder product, combining a balanced combination of essential nutrients for legume crops. It's easy to mix, safe to the crop, and is, like all YaraVita products, very tank mixable with other products that may be going on at the same time. So it contains sulfur, boron, manganese, magnesium, and also some molybdenum. It is only available in 10 kilo packs now. It used to be available in 20 kilos, but we're only producing in 10 kilogram packs now. And our recommendation for peas and beans would be to apply 3 kilos to the hectare of Foliar Pro. And if the crop is struggling, if there's enough leaf cover to intercept the spray, then it would be worth getting an application on. And certainly later on in the season, when the crop's flowering and setting pods, that will be another opportunity to top those nutrients up. So just to sort of summarize the takeaway messages from today, it's all about, in my view, ensuring we're supplying nutrient sufficiency. I think if we're treating nutrient deficiency, then we've potentially already compromised yield. And there's always that hidden hunger element as well that I showed right at the start. So if we take a proactive approach by using tissue analysis in conjunction with soil analysis, or even sap analysis if that's your preferred route, and take that approach throughout the season, then at least we've got we can make an informed decision about foliar nutrient applications. So in oilseed rape, we talked about Brachytrol Pro, 3 litres to the hectare applied in the spring, and that's now during that sort of rapid stem extension stage. And there's always the option of going back later on if you think the crop potential needs boosting with products like Crop Lift Pro or Safe N. And then in the cereals, if there's an opportunity to travel and get an application of Crop Boost on, it will help with rooting and tillering. And then later on, growth stage 30 onwards, the Gramitrel application will help supply all those other key nutrients we've talked about, but consider including some Bore-Trac at the same time. Later on in the season, improving your grain quality with magnesium, potassium, and phosphate. An application of Magphos K contains all those key nutrients at that time. And finally, just on pulses, as I've just mentioned, support that nitrogen fixation early on with Foliar Pro, and then again later on when the crop's flowering and setting seeds later on. The YaraVita products offer consistent performance. I've shown you that in the results I've shown you. The high quality, excellent tank mixability, and extremely safe to the crop and the user. And you've got full traceability for the products as well. And you should have confidence in those products as well. So that's sort of bringing me to the end of the presentation today. My contact details are there. If you've got any queries about what we've covered today, please do get in touch. Or any other aspect throughout the growing season, if you wanted to, please do get in touch. I'll be quite happy to take a call or an email. If I can be of help, I'm here to help.